Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to take a look at a very frugal, or I should say inexpensive set of watercolors. I wasn't going to review this paint actually. I was contacted by Meeden. I've reviewed some of their other products and I've loved their paper. I really like their cotton watercolor paper. I like the pochade box that I got from them. I like the ceramic palettes and the tin palettes I've purchased in the past. But I've never been crazy about their paints, and they said they reformulated their watercolors and they'd like me to take a look at them, and I said, well, I'll try them out, but if I don't like them, I'm not going to use them. And then I started to see some reviews of this paint online that were very favorable on YouTube, and I thought, maybe I'll give them another chance. Maybe I missed something, but after giving them a pretty thorough another chance, I'm gonna stick by my first impressions of these, which honestly were not great. So let's get into it. I'm going to be as unbiased as I can. As always, I like to look at art products with an open mind, and I've liked a lot of other products from this company, some that I've purchased and some that have been sent to me. And these, I just don't think the paints are as good as the other things I've tried. But I will let you listen to my review, listen to other people's reviews, and make up that decision for yourself. So they are currently selling a set that's got these 24 tubes of watercolors, a pad of their 100% cotton watercolor paper, and a watercolor brush set and a small ceramic palette that is going for, I think, around $34 or $35 on Meeden.com, and I think it might be on Amazon as well. The paints themselves are about $17, and this block of paper on its own is like 15 something. I highly recommend the paper. The brushes, I don't remember what the brushes are on their own, but they're not very expensive. So where do we start? Let's just start by looking at the box. They've redone their packaging. It used to be in kind of like a box, kind of like Arteza, that had like a slide out chipboard tray. It had the slide out plastic trays and like a watercolory motif on the front. They've switched it to this more primary color packaging. On the back, you can see the 24 colors and their pigment numbers that they've used, which I like. I love it when companies put the pigment information on there. I notice more and more budget brands are doing it, but the problem with it is that sometimes I don't think that their information is accurate. The other thing is that some of the pigments are not artist grade customary pigments. They're more pigments from cosmetics, which are cheaper, but they're not lightfast, because cosmetics don't need to be lightfast. They just need to be non-toxic. So there's quite a few pigments through here that are not the most lightfast, like PY1, PO13, PR13, PR21. A lot of these pigments are just not customarily used in fine artist paints. And they say this black is PBK11, but it has absolutely no granulation. It's extremely smooth and black. I don't believe that is even correct. So I'm kind of inclined not to trust the pigment information here. It's got a little key as to light fastness, and I don't really think that a PR101 burnt sienna would have the same light fastness as a PY1 yellow. It just, those are two different pigments with two different ratings, and PR101 is very high light fast, PY1 is very low light fast, so I almost think they might just be making this information up because they know people like to read something about the paints. So it's only useful if it's accurate, and I doubt that it's accurate. And I know this may sound really critical, but I wasn't even going to do this review because I wasn't impressed with the paints, but then when I saw, and not to cast shade on any other reviewer out there. I have a reason why I think that they're giving these a higher rating, and I'll get into that later. But I feel like we need a counterpoint because there's a few good reviews on this paint, and I don't think that the paint is really up to the level that it's being reviewed at. There's no information on here as to where the paint is manufactured, and there wasn't actually on the watercolor paper either, and I didn't notice that, but I tend to look for paints like where they're manufactured in pencils, actual media stuff, more than paper, but there's no indication of where this is made, which I thought was weird because usually you have that, but it does have a non-toxic certification from the AP and CE non-toxic, so hopefully I would imagine that's the case because it looks like there's a lot of cosmetic and maybe even food grade pigments being used in here and not art pigments. So there's a high chance that it's completely non-toxic. So that's a good thing. Taking a look at the packaging, we've got two plastic trays in here. The tubes are 12 ml. They look pretty similar to a lot of the other budget brands out there. And these, honestly, they behave like a budget paint. They're not intrinsically horrible. They're about the same as other budget brand paints you're going to pay about the same price for. So for, you know, 17 bucks, and if you use a coupon code, which I think I have a 15% off coupon code, that even takes some more money off of it. Amazon's got a like an 8% coupon code right there on the website. So, I mean, these aren't inexpensive paint. These are priced around what Reeves and Royal and Langnickel and Arteza and other budget brands are. So, I mean, they're right in line. I think they're priced fairly for what they are, but I heard some other reviews that were kind of making these sound like they were, wow, I can't believe how great these are for the price. They're almost like professional grade, and that they're not, in my opinion. They are not near professional grade. For what you're getting for the price, yes, I think it's absolutely priced fairly, but if you're expecting to have even a Cotman quality, I don't think you're getting it here. These are definitely not as good as Cotman, which are more, but not extraordinarily more. Definitely not as good as Grumbacher Academy, Schmincke Academy, any of the name brand student grades. These budget grades are a little bit lower than that. But for the price, I mean, yeah, I could say that it's fair for the price. So they've got a nice clean look. These are aluminum tubes. You didn't have to puncture them to get the paint out, which was nice, because that can be kind of a drag when you gotta, you know, find a pin or something and puncture all the holes. You've got the AP seal on them, non-toxic. You got the name, the pigment information, and the lightfast ratings, and the opacity. And I don't get the opacity ratings either, because I did swatch them out with a marker stripe underneath, and maybe like the cerulean is, I would say, semi-transparent. The yellow ochre is semi-transparent. That's pretty typical. Gamboge has a little bit of haze on the line. I mean, nothing, it's pretty typical of watercolor. There wasn't anything that was terribly opaque. The titanium white has some opacity to it, not as much as a gouache, but it's got some opacity to it. But this is a PBK11. PBK11 should be extremely gritty looking and textured and gorgeous, and I was very excited when I saw it was PBK11, but this looks more like a lamp black. It's very smooth, it's very inky, does not at all look like a PBK11, so I'm guessing that is a typo. The burnt umber looks okay, but it's rather weak. It's kind of gloopy, and it's got two different browns, a PBR6 and a PY42, which is kind of a strange combination for a burnt umber. And then the burnt sienna is PR101, which is that reddish, more like an Indian red or Venetian red, English red type color. Also kind of gloppy and weird, like they bulked it out with a lot of extenders, which is weird because earth tones are quite inexpensive. They don't really need to be bulked out, in my opinion. And then you have the raw umber, which is PBR6 and PBK11, which I don't think it's PBK11 because there's not nearly enough granulation. There's quite a bit of filler in this paint. You'll see if you look closely. You get, well, I don't know if you can see it on camera, but you do see this little bit of flocculation. It's similar to granulation, but in a less attractive format. It's more of like it's almost like a scaliness to the paint that you'll see when you've got like chalk or other extenders in them. I wouldn't call these chalky though, but they are a little bit streaky and a little bit they've got that little bit of scaliness to it. So yeah, it's kind of I think it's a little bit limiting, because once you start layering up, you're going to start seeing your paints get a little duller and duller and duller the more you layer up, and we'll see that in an example in just a minute. The ultramarine blue really didn't have any granulation, which is pretty odd for PB29, so it makes me think that maybe they had PB29 plus they had some sort of dyes to boost it a little bit, and that gave it a more smooth appearance. Which it could be. I mean, they could be filling it. I just don't think the pigment information is the whole story. The cerulean hue is your basic phthalo blue plus white. The rose is pretty nice. The crimson's it's a pretty color, but I wouldn't trust the light fastness ratings on these. You can see the scaliness in the purple there. This is PG7 is a good green to use for mixing, but again, I didn't find any of these had a really good flow, and I honestly just didn't really enjoy using them. There's nothing, there's nothing exciting about the pigments they're using. Some are okay, some are not that great. But what I did was I took the colors I thought were the most promising and I put them in a palette and let them dry out. I didn't even want to commit half pans to these because I'm like, I really don't think I'm going to use these. After I do this review, I'll probably just give those paints away. But I do believe they're non-toxic, so I'd give them to somebody that works with kids so that they could actually get used up. So what I did was I put the lemon yellow, I put the gamboge, I put the yellow ochre, I put the vermilion, rose, ultramarine blue, Prussian blue, phthalo green, violet, the burnt umber, and the black. Oh, and I put crimson too. I put the colors that I thought were the most potent, that would just give me the best results for doing some paintings. I put them in here and let them dry down, and I did paint with those today, and I'll show you that example. But first I'm going to show you, well, I did 2 examples with these dried down, but I'll show you my first examples first, and they were just some pretty like just quick and easy. Just let me get a feel for this paint and see what I think. This one actually I liked quite a bit. This is on the Shizen handmade 5x7 paper. I have a ton of this stuff, and I actually really like that kind of really wet into wet loose. It performed pretty well in this paper. So if your goal is just to do loose florals and you have some rough handmade cotton watercolor paper hanging around that you want to use up and you just want something to practice with, these would be fine for that. Absolutely. I don't think they're the best bang for your buck. Honestly though, I think you could get one of those fan palettes. Meeden even has a fan palette. That would be a better way to spend your $17, would be to buy that rather than this set, or the pretty excellent set of half pans. Either of those sets would be much better than these tubes in my opinion. So if you want to buy a Meeden set because you want to buy that the watercolor paper, which is really good, and you just want to get your watercolors from the same place, I would go with a fan set. It's going to be better paint. It's not as much paint, but it's better paint. Then I'm like, well, let me try it just with a smoother stroke on a smoother paper, and I just wasn't loving it. I didn't spend a lot of time on it. Then I tried a wet into wet. I wanted to see if the ultramarine blue would granulate, because if it's going to granulate, it's going to granulate on a really heavily textured paper the best. And there is some texture here, but it's mostly the paper and very little of the granulation. I was just, you know, wanted to see what the wet and wet would look like. And then I grabbed a different paper. This is just some hot press paper. And I just did a quick little flower. And I thought that was a little promising. And I swatched out the blacks. I just wanted to see, is there any texture in there whatsoever? Nothing. This is like ink. I don't think it's PBK 11. I don't know how it could be, because why would you grind it down that much? I didn't try it with a magnet or anything, but I really don't think it's PBK 11. So then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna let that dry down, give it another shot, and this is on Strathmore Wind Power. I thought I'll do lilacs. I do lilacs all the time. Pretty easy technique. You paint real juicy lilacs, you throw some salt in there, and you see the salt will give you all this little starbursts, look like little blossoms. And this was very wet. I threw the salt in. Hardly any effect, just little hard little shapes where the salt crystals were actually sitting. It was kosher salt. Did not get that burst of salt that you usually get with watercolor, so that makes me think that there is some dye filler in here to get the colors bright enough, because I was thinking, how can these colors be so sluggish and feel so gloopy when they're that vibrant? And I think that's where people are giving these higher rating than they deserve, because these look really vibrant. You're painting them out, they seem really vibrant, but they're not moving. Like if you wet an area, well, let me just do this right here. Just take a piece of watercolor paper. I'm just gonna wet an area. Actually, let's use their brushes. Might as well, got them right here. I mean, they're pretty brushes. So I'll wet an area. And then let's use a round brush, and let's just drop a few colors in. It's moving a bit, but it's quite wet. Let's try the phthalo. Maybe the phthalo will give us, because it's nice and bright. See, it just kind of sits there, even with all, this is quite wet, even with all the water. Let's do some ultramarine blue. That one actually moves pretty well. But that's also the one that I thought was kind of had some dye in it, maybe. That purple's just kind of sitting there. Compared to other paints that I use typically. I mean, it's not flowing as much as I would expect to on such a wet piece of paper. That one's moving pretty well. I mean, hey, prove me wrong, paints, you can do that. I want to be honest. I don't care about being proved right or wrong. I just want to be honest here. That yellow's got a good amount of push to it. But I just didn't find it to be as flowy as other paints that I've used. You know, like that's just kind of sitting there. So it just leads me to believe that there's a lot of filler in there, and it is slowing down the vehicle of the paint, just kind of making it sit, but it's so vibrant. So it seems like, oh, it's great paint, it's so vibrant. But I think that it's been boosted with dyes that's making it nice and vibrant, but if it was that strong with the pigments that it says are in there, I think we'd get a lot more whoosh when we touched our brush to paper. That's my opinion, obviously, but that's what I think anyway. And these are the brushes. It's a set of 10. It's part of their kit, and I don't know what these are on their own. I've used a few of the rounds. They're white bristles, so they do stain, which is kind of a bummer because they're not going to be as pretty as they start off. I mean, they're all right. They're all right, although I was losing hairs, not a lot, but like I'd be painting something and then a hair would just get longer and longer and longer on the tip of the brush and I have to pull it out with a paper towel. That happened about 4 times while I was painting. I mean, not huge, not a big deal, but there's lots of cheap brushes on Amazon that are okay. So, I mean, I wouldn't say run out and grab these. I do kind of like that they have longer hairs to hold more paint, but it also drops paint pretty quick. They're very slippery nylon hairs. They don't have the, usually the more a brush hair is dyed, the darker the brush hair, generally the better water holding capacity I've found. Like your faux squirrels are usually black. And I just think it's the having that variety of bristle shapes and having some of the bristles kind of having little like holes throughout the filament to grab the water. These just feel like they're very slick and like the watercolor wants to slide off really quickly. You'll have a big huge bead at the end of your brush. That was my experience with this next painting I'm going to show you. And I think the painting came out all right, but painting it, I just felt like, I mean, I think it's pretty enough, but painting it, I found like I was losing luminosity the more and more I added, and the paint just felt very, just kind of gloopy, I guess, is the only adjective. But you can do some good techniques. Like I soaked the paper. Well, I didn't really soak it. I just wet it, and then I did wash to go over everything. So I mixed the ultramarine, the phthalo blue, and a little bit of gamboge to make the color for the sky, and I just kind of washed that in. And I took some violet and some burnt umber and made the mountains, and then I used some sap green and dabbed in some of these colors for some faraway poppies, and put a wash of gamboge plus I think it was Scar Vermilion on the flowers, and then I let that dry, and then I went over and just started layering up colors. But I did notice it just started to get kind of flat and dull the more I was layering up, so I just stopped because I knew it wasn't gonna get better by adding more. It just kind of needed to be done. So if you, like I said, if you're gonna do a lot of like loose one layer wet into wet flowers and things like that, I think you'll be fine. But if you want to start like layering up and building luminosity, it's not going to work so much. It's going to get kind of flat as light can't pass through the glazed layers that you lay on top. And I think this came out as well as it did just because it's on this paper, and that's where I think the other reviewers may be misled. If they're only using this paint on this paper, they're going to have a much higher opinion of this paint than if they tried it on a variety of different papers, namely a cellulose paper, which a lot of beginners are probably going to start off with like a Strathmore 300 or some other cellulose paper. And I think using these on that paper is not going to be a great experience because anytime when I use these on these cellulose papers, I was not that keen. Even using them on a cotton paper here, this handmade cotton paper, it wasn't great, except I did like this all right. But still, definitely not as much as like the fan palettes or the Pretty Excellent palettes. Those are a much better buy if you've got $17 to spend on your watercolors, in my opinion. The brushes, like I said, they're okay. They're pretty, they're unique, but I really don't think they're anything to write home about. I think that you can get pretty equivalent quality from most like Taklon. I actually prefer golden Taklon or a faux squirrel over a nylon because the bristles stain. They also tend to be a little more floppy, and also they tend to drop paint when you don't expect it. They tend to just drop all the paint at once. So yeah, they probably wouldn't be my recommendation either. The paper, absolutely. This paper is awesome. I've been using it with other paints. I highly recommend it, but the other stuff I think's a miss. And I don't like to be negative, and I like the company Meeden. I think the company Meeden does a good job with their products overall. Their palettes, their empty palettes, you put your own palette stuff in your watercolor paper, which is made by Bohong, I believe. They also sell the Bohong Academy paper under the Bohong branding as well. Their furniture, anything like that I've tried has been great, like the tools, furniture, that sort of thing, but the paints, the watercolor paints are just kind of a miss, except for the fan palette, which is private labeled from another company. And I'm sure all this stuff is private labeled. This does seem to be very similar to a lot of the other 12 ml budget watercolors that we see out there, which I I was pretty sure it probably was, but I wanted to give it the benefit of the doubt and just make sure I wasn't missing anything. But I would honestly give these a pass. If for some reason you want to order this or anything from the Meeden website, I think I have a 15% off coupon code that I can share. I'll put it in the video description, and you can use it to buy whatever you want. But I would strongly urge you to get the paper, but skip the paints. Brushes are okay, but I'm not going to cheerlead them. I love all their ceramic palettes though. And even their watercolor tins, the empty tins, those are good too. And the pochade boxes are wonderful. Just the watercolor paints are a miss. And that's all. I mean, and not to even throw any other watercolor reviewers under the bus. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but I disagreed with the other reviews that I'd seen on this. I only seen 2 other like video YouTube reviews on this, and both of them really loved the paint. And I was like, I gotta try this again because I'm missing something. And I'm like, nope, I'm not missing something. I'm pretty sure it's the paper that they're impressed with and not the paint, because the paper's great. The paint is sadly more the same. Anyway, please give me a thumbs up if you like this review. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Would you rather me not review a product if it's not great? Let me know that too. I don't think I'm overly negative. I'm certainly not trying to trash the brand or anything, but I do want to warn you if you're like hearing great things about a product and I don't think it's really worth the hype. I'm going to tell you what I think, at least give you a moment of pause so you can really judge whether you want to try the product or not. Anyway, I have no axe to grind with any other reviewers. That's just my opinion. And I hope you enjoyed it. And if you would be curious in a tutorial for this, I did not record this, but I could redo it with different paint if you want to. And I could do this project again, maybe as a live stream or something. I don't know. Just let me know in the comments below if you would be interested. I feel like I have like 25 Poppy watercolor tutorials on my channel already. In fact, why don't I just link to my Poppy watercolor tutorials in the video description. You can check those out. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy crafting. Bye.